Why would a woman freeze in fear just from seeing a name on a mailbox? That's the question that started it all. Not the threats, not the fake fines, not the armed intimidation tactics that came later. No, everything changed the moment she saw my grandfather's last name, Donovan. And in that moment, everything about our dream home turned into something else. I'm Carter Hayes. I was just a regular guy with a simple dream, a fresh start, a peaceful life for my wife and daughter. After years of saving, we bought a lovely 2-story house on a quiet street in Meadowbrook. At least it looked quiet on paper. I wanted Luna, my 8-year-old, to grow up with bike rides, sidewalk chalk, lemonade stands. You know, the kind of life kids used to have. And I thought we had found the perfect place. But the truck hadn't even finished pulling away before she arrived. Vivian Sterling. She didn't knock. She didn't smile. She appeared like a thundercloud on a sunny day. Clipboard, blazer. The kind of expression that said she was born to ruin your afternoon. You could almost hear the HOA bylaws clicking in her brain like ammunition being loaded. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said with a forced grin. "I'm here to help you get into compliance." Compliance? I hadn't even taken the tape off our moving boxes yet. She shoved a stack of papers into my hands like she was handing me a subpoena. Legal language everywhere. Rule 3.4, Section 5. Immediate enforcement. Fines, dates, citations. All written. In bold. But there was one problem. I had read the deed when I bought the place. There was no HOA. No mandatory membership. Nothing binding. "Thanks," I said carefully, not wanting to be rude. "But I already checked. My deed doesn't mention any active HOA." And that's when the mask cracked. Just a flicker. Like a rubber band snapping before she forced her face back into that smug smile. "Oh, you must have received outdated documentation," she said sweetly. "These are the original community standards. They override anything in your personal paperwork. It's all perfectly legal." Behind me, my grandfather stepped onto the porch. General Samuel Hawk Donovan. At 75, his spine was straighter than most men in their 30s. 3 tours. Bronze star. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be listened to. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her. That stare. The kind that makes lesser people rethink everything they just said. And then she stopped. Her lips trembled. Her eyes locked onto the mailbox like it had grown fangs. "Donovan," she whispered. Not loud, just enough for us to hear. And she turned pale. That's when I realized something was very, very wrong. This wasn't about HOA. Rules. This wasn't about yard signs or mailbox colors. This was personal. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. I tried to stay calm. "Look, I'm happy to review any documents you have, but I won't sign anything without my lawyer." That's when it happened. Vivian's expression darkened. She stepped back and pulled out her phone like she'd been waiting for an excuse. "Need police assistance," she said loudly, eyes scanning the neighbors. "We've got a new resident refusing to comply and acting aggressively." It was like a play, like it had all been rehearsed. Right on cue, Mrs. Patterson from next door stormed out yelling something about our moving truck blocking her mailbox. Mr. Rodriguez started shouting from across the street, claiming I had cursed at him. None of it was true. But it didn't matter. Vivian had already dialed 911. 15 minutes later, Officer Martinez rolled up looking half asleep and fully annoyed. As he began taking statements, Grandpa stood beside me, arms crossed, eyes scanning. The scene like he was back in combat. That's when he noticed something. At the corner of the street, a man was standing. Stocky. Sunglasses. Professional-grade camera in hand. Recording. "Interesting," Grandpa murmured. "Very interesting." Officer Martinez finished the interviews and gave me a weary glance. "No violations found," he said simply. "Just neighbor drama, I guess." Vivian looked furious. "This is just the beginning," she hissed, snatching the papers back. "You'll learn to respect our rules, one way or another." As the crowd began to dissipate, something slipped from her folder. A printed violation notice. Grandpa picked it up and studied it. "Community safety violation," he read aloud. $375 fine. Then he pointed. "Look at the typos," he said. 3 of them. Then he flipped the document over and inspected the notary seal with a magnifying glass from his pocket toolkit. Fake seal, he said flatly. Amateur forgery. I blinked. Wait. You think this is fraud? I know it is, he said. This isn't just some overzealous HOA lady. This is organized and sloppy. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He just handed me the paper and said, "We're not dealing with a Karen. We're dealing with a predator." Later that evening, as we unpacked in silence, I looked over at my daughter Luna. She was coloring, a rainbow on the kitchen floor, humming softly to herself, completely unaware of what had just happened. She deserved better. And I knew deep in my bones that this woman, this Vivian, was not done. She had a reason for coming at us so fast, so hard. Before we had even moved in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the answer had something to do with my grandfather. "What are you thinking?" I asked him that night. He stood quietly by the window, arms folded behind his back. "She's been watching," he said. "Waiting, planning. For us." He nodded once. "She recognized the name Donovan," he said, "and whatever she remembers about it made her afraid." The next morning, it got worse, way worse. Luna had just finished her cereal and went outside to draw hopscotch squares on the sidewalk. I was rinsing dishes in the sink. The sun was shining. Birds were singing. It should have been a normal, quiet suburban day. But then I heard it. Heels on concrete, rhythmic, precise. I looked out the window. Vivian was back, and this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her was the stocky man from the corner, now up close, clipboard in one hand, measuring tape in the other, wearing an official-looking badge that screamed fake authority. They were walking toward my daughter. Something inside me broke. But I wasn't fast enough. I heard Vivian's voice through the glass. "Honey," she said in a sugar-sweet tone that made my skin crawl. Children aren't allowed to play on the sidewalk unsupervised. Luna looked confused. "But Daddy said I could." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Well, sweetheart, your daddy doesn't understand the rules. But we're here to help your family learn to be good neighbors." The man started measuring chalk drawings, snapping photos. Vivian handed Luna a paper. "A child safety citation, $200. If violations continue," she said coldly, "we'll have to involve child services. And that wouldn't be very nice, would it?" My daughter dropped the chalk and ran. She burst through the door, tears. In her eyes, "Grandpa, the mean people say they're going to take me away." And in that moment, the general didn't hesitate. He knelt down, scooped her up in his arms, and said words I will never forget. "Sweetheart, nobody's taking you anywhere. Not today. Not ever." But I saw something change in his eyes. This wasn't about housing codes anymore. This wasn't about HOA nonsense. This was war. And she had just threatened the wrong soldier's family. You don't threaten a child and walk away clean, especially not when her grandfather spent 30 years protecting families from enemies overseas. That night, our dining room became a war room. Luna was safe, curled up on the couch watching cartoons, still sniffling but calm again under Grandma's gentle care. Meanwhile, Grandpa had spread a full neighborhood map across the dining table, lines drawn, pins marked, notes scribbled in the margins with military precision. "First rule of engagement," he said, tapping a red X over Vivian's house. "Know your enemy better than she knows herself." I was still reeling from what happened that morning. I couldn't stop hearing Luna's voice in my head. They said they'd take me away. And no matter how many times I told myself it was an empty threat, something in Vivian's eyes told me otherwise. This wasn't a bluff. This was a tactic, and according to Grandpa, it wasn't her first time. "She didn't panic," he said, studying the printed child safety citation she'd handed my daughter. "She didn't stutter. She didn't make a mistake. That wasn't an improvisation. That was rehearsed." I looked over his shoulder as he highlighted another house 2 doors down. "What's that one?" "Foreclosure last year," he said. "Family with 2 kids. Moved out in under 90 days. According to public records, property was sold to something called Sterling Properties LLC. I froze. Sterling, I said. As in Vivian Sterling? He nodded slowly. She's not enforcing rules, he said grimly. She's creating chaos, harassment, fear, intimidation, then buying the homes after families break. I felt a wave of anger rising in my chest. That's criminal. He looked up at me. It's strategic. The next morning, Grandpa installed discrete cameras around our property. Motion activated, high resolution, hidden under eaves and birdhouses. He showed me how to timestamp every video clip, catalog interactions, and log suspicious activity with military formatting. Every moment counts, he said. Every quote, every name, every document. In war, intelligence wins battles, and this, he held up the fake HOA notice again, is an intelligence war. By day 3, we had hours of footage. Marcus, the stocky guy with the fake badge, returned twice, measuring our backyard from the street and pretending to be on a phone call while taking pictures. He never once stepped onto the lawn. Smart. No trespassing. But Grandpa noticed. Something else. Look at the angle, he said, rewinding one of the recordings. He's not photographing our fence. He paused the video. He's photographing Luna's swing set. A chill went through me. What kind of person documents a child's play area? Grandpa didn't answer. He just picked up his phone and called someone. When he hung up, he said, "A friend of mine, Alex Rodriguez, local PD. He's a good cop stuck in a bad system. He's on his way." Detective Alex Rodriguez showed up that evening, not in a squad car, not in uniform. Just a man with weary eyes and a badge tucked into his back pocket. He sat at our kitchen table like he'd done it 100 times before. "Sorry about the circus," he said after I caught him up. "Vivian's address is flagged in our system. 15 noise complaints this year. 4 families moved out since 2023. Patterns there. But proving it? Not easy." I showed him the citation. The fake notary seal. The footage of Marcus photographing Luna's play area. He leaned back in his chair. "Okay," he said. "This isn't amateur hour." "No," Grandpa replied. "This is organized. She's done this before, and she's targeting military. Families." That caught Alex off guard. "How do you know?" "Because she recognized my name," Grandpa said. And that wasn't HOA panic. That was personal panic. Later that night, we searched public property records and cross-referenced the names of families that had moved out recently. 3 out of the 4 had military backgrounds, retired officers, veterans, wounded service members. She wasn't just harassing homeowners, she was picking people who had lived through conflict. And were too proud to fight back through legal loopholes, people like us. "Why us?" I whispered that night, watching Luna sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit tight to her chest. "Why my family?" Grandpa's voice came from the hallway. "She saw my name," he said, and that name opened a 20-year wound. The next morning, we found out what that meant. Grandpa opened a dusty file box from the attic. Old medals, deployment photos, service records. And in one file, a newspaper clipping, yellowed with time. A photo, Vivian, younger, thinner, standing beside a man in military uniform. The caption read, "Vivian Kowalski, wife of Staff Sergeant David Sterling, honored at commendation ceremony under Battalion Commander Colonel Samuel Donovan." My stomach dropped. Grandpa was in the background of the photo, placing a medal on that soldier's chest. "That's Tommy Sterling," he said quietly. "Saved 6 Afghan children from a suicide bomber. Died 3 weeks later from a roadside explosion." I turned to him. "Wait, Sterling? As in?" "Yes," he said. "Vivian's husband." He rubbed his temples, suddenly looking 10 years older. "She blamed me," he said. "Filed official complaints after his death. Claimed I sent him on a suicide mission for publicity. The investigation cleared me 3 times, but she never accepted it. And now she's taking it out on us." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. She'd been waiting for this, watching for the name Donovan to reappear somewhere. And when it did, she pounced. But we weren't the same family she had targeted in her mind. We weren't weak. We weren't broken. We were prepared. Vivian didn't know that Tommy had once written to Grandpa, during his final leave before deployment. He'd expressed concern about his wife, about her spending, about documents going missing, about strange accounts opened in his name. He hadn't wanted to believe it, but he'd left instructions. And a key. Grandpa reached into the file box and pulled out a sealed envelope. The words, "Open only if something happens to me," were written, in neat military print. His hands trembled slightly as he held it. "I never had the heart," he said. Until now, inside was the beginning of everything. Documents, photographs, bank records, signed statements from a private investigator, all pointing to one conclusion. Vivian Sterling had begun her fraud campaign long before her husband's death. Forged insurance paperwork, life insurance overextensions, fake medical claims, and worse, a documented pattern of researching military benefits related to widow compensation before he deployed. She was preparing to profit off his death, I whispered, and now she was using her grieving widow act to exploit and terrorize other families like ours. Grandpa's face turned cold, not angry, not vengeful, just decisive. "She's moved from fraud to warfare," he said, "and we have the intelligence to bring her down. Some enemies don't come kicking down your door. They wear blazers, smile like they mean it, and attack you through your daughter." It was day 4. Luna didn't eat breakfast that morning. She just pushed her cereal around the bowl and stared out the window. The same window where she'd last seen Vivian and Marcus documenting her hopscotch squares like they were evidence in a criminal case. "She keeps asking if she's in trouble," my wife whispered. "If the people with the clipboard are going to take her away." I nodded silently. I didn't have an answer that would make her feel safe, because truth was, I didn't know anymore. That afternoon, Grandpa quietly pulled a long black storage case from the garage, not a weapon, a scanner, the kind used to detect surveillance bugs. I didn't ask where he got it. I just watched him sweep every outlet. "Window frame, lamp fixture, not paranoia," he said, noticing my look. "Precaution." And he was right. Because what we discovered next changed everything. One of our new neighbors, Mrs. Patterson, the same woman who had yelled about our moving truck, had listed her house for sale, below market value. I called the realtor listed on the sign, asked a few innocent questions, confirmed the buyer was none other than Sterling Properties, LLC, another house, same pattern, and the previous owner, a disabled Air Force vet with 2 kids. Moved out last year after child safety violations and multiple threats from HOA agents. Sound familiar? The deeper we dug, the darker it got. That night, Grandpa opened a file folder labeled Op for Patterns, Vivian Sterling. A full psychological breakdown, past aliases, bank account transfers, notarized forms from a revoked notary license Marcus used to hold. "She's not working alone," Grandpa said flatly. "This is a coordinated operation. She uses intimidation to depress property value, then buys the house using shell companies." He circled a name on the document. "Trevor Ashford," he said. "City Council." How's he connected? Votes in favor of HOA expansions. Publicly defends mandatory neighborhood compliance laws. And guess what shows up in his campaign disclosures? Sterling Properties, I whispered. $75,000 in consulting fees over 18 months, Grandpa confirmed. This wasn't just HOA harassment. This was criminal racketeering, fraud, political manipulation. But what hit hardest? Vivian had done it all under the mask of a grieving widow, and she wasn't done with us. She escalated fast. The next day, we received a notice in our mailbox, not mailed, placed by hand, no return address, an inspection report claiming our home had structural issues that posed community safety risks, fake city seal, fake engineer's stamp, fake permit office phone number, but it looked official enough to scare any average homeowner into compliance or into selling. That same evening, we got a knock at the door. A city inspector, a real one. He looked confused as he flipped through the fake report. "This isn't ours," he said. "This isn't even the right format. Where did you get this?" I handed it over. "Someone wants us gone." The inspector, narrowed his eyes. That's a crime. Forging an inspection report. That's felony territory. I nodded. We're already building the case. We showed him the footage of Marcus dropping something in our mailbox. We gave him the documents, and we gave him Alex Rodriguez's number. By that weekend, Detective Alex had looped in a federal contact, not just about Vivian, but about Trevor, and the properties, and the money, and the documents. He was building something. But Vivian wasn't waiting around. She launched her own offensive. That Sunday, a video appeared online, heavily edited, grainy footage showing my grandfather standing on the porch, voice raised slightly, distorted just enough to sound aggressive. Caption read, "Retired General threatens neighbors." Is this who we want living in our community? The video went viral on local neighborhood apps. Comments poured in. He looks unstable. I heard he screamed at kids. Call CPS. And suddenly, Luna's friends weren't allowed to come near our house. Parents crossed the street to avoid us. Neighbors turned their backs. The isolation was fast, ruthless, strategic, and she used my grandfather's military service photo, without permission, in her posts. Vivian wasn't just trying to evict us, she was trying to erase us, to make sure that even if we stayed, we'd never belong. Luna stopped going outside completely. She watched the world through the window like it was hostile territory. Her drawings turned dark. No more butterflies. Now it was men with clipboards. Police. Cars. Crying families. One night she whispered, "Daddy, what if the bad people come while I'm sleeping?" That broke me. But Grandpa? He didn't flinch. He just watched, calculated, and planned. He started countering her attacks not with anger, but with strategy. Every fake violation, documented, every visit, time-stamped. He taught me how to build timelines, how to connect phone calls to events, how to trace when a file was printed, and when it was placed. He didn't shout back. He didn't threaten. He built a war chest of facts. One day, I caught him watching footage of Marcus photographing our driveway. Not once, but 5 different angles. Grandpa turned the laptop to me. "Watch." His earpiece, he said. In one clip, Marcus nods, then turns, takes a new angle. "That's not freelance harassment," Grandpa said. "That's remote direction. Vivian's coaching him, probably from her car." Alex confirmed it later. Through a warrant, they traced encrypted calls from Vivian's number to Marcus's phone, each matching the exact timestamps of the harassment sessions. She wasn't acting, she was commanding. And that changed everything. Vivian's crimes weren't just local now. They were federal, wire fraud, harassment, conspiracy, document forgery. And that's when Grandpa made his biggest move yet. He called in favors from former officers, from VA contacts, from people who didn't ask questions. They just answered his call within days. We had statements from families in other counties, other states, other military families, same tactics, same names, same pressure, all leading back to Vivian Sterling and her fake HOA. One family even had documents with the same typos as ours, including the wrong zip code on the bottom corner, proof that the forgery operation was copying and pasting its way across state lines. That's when we knew. This wasn't just personal revenge anymore. Vivian had turned her hatred into a full-scale criminal enterprise, and it was thriving, until we moved in, until she recognized the name Donovan, and triggered the one man who knew exactly how to dismantle an enemy's operation, from the inside out. That night, as Grandpa reviewed footage of Marcus photographing our mailbox for the 3rd time, he spoke without looking up. "She's going to escalate," I turned to him. "More than this?" He nodded. When people like Vivian realize their target isn't breaking, they panic. And desperate people make mistakes. "What kind of mistake?" He turned to me. "The kind that gets her arrested." She didn't break us with noise complaints. She didn't break us with fake fines, child safety threats, or isolation. So she turned to something far more brutal. She went for our reputation, and then for our livelihood. It began with a knock on the door that didn't come from a neighbor or a clipboard. It came by certified mail, an envelope marked urgent from my employer's HR department. I hadn't missed work. I hadn't done anything wrong, but the letter told a different story. It cited anonymous community complaints, accompanied by a printed flash drive containing video evidence of me intimidating neighbors, making hostile threats, and engaging in suspicious activities that may endanger local residents. And at the center of every edited clip was me, twisted into a villain, taken from Vivian's surveillance footage, warped through clever audio manipulation, timed to look like I was chasing Marcus, screaming at kids, even kicking over a lawn, sign I'd never touched. I read the letter 3 times before I realized what was happening. Suspended, indefinitely, pending a full investigation. No paycheck, no health coverage, no safety net. Just like that. We lost the only steady income we had, and that's exactly what she wanted, because 2 hours later, another envelope appeared. No return address, just a sheet of printer paper with one sentence typed in bold. Your family's nightmare can end tonight. $5,000. Memorial Park, 10 p.m. Bring the cash. Leave it under the 3rd bench. I stared at the page. No name, no threats. Just the offer. Blackmail disguised as mercy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the money, storm to that park, and throw it in her face. But then I heard Luna crying upstairs again, her 3rd nightmare that week, and I looked at my wife, staring silently into her tea like it held the last of her strength, and for the first time, I broke. What if we just paid? I whispered. My voice cracked. What if we just ended this? My wife didn't answer. She didn't need to. The tears in her eyes said everything. Vivian had done it. She had worn us down, not with violence, but with erosion, 1,000 cuts, and now she was offering the bandage for a price. That night, I opened the old lockbox in the closet and began counting out bills, vacation savings, Luna's future savings, the emergency fund we swore we'd never touch. When I zipped the envelope, Grandpa was waiting in the hallway. You're not going, he said simply. I didn't argue, I just held up the money. They win if we break, I said. But they win if we lose Luna, too. She's scared of the window, she won't eat, she barely speaks. I can't let her suffer just because we're trying to be right. Grandpa stepped forward and gently took the envelope from my hand. Then, he walked into the garage. When he returned, he handed me a new envelope, identical, but heavier. Fake bills, he said, wrapped around a recording device. I looked at him. You knew? I've fought tyrants who used bribes to manufacture guilt, he said. You think this is the first ambush I've seen? And that's when he made the call. Detective. Alex picked up on the first ring. We have a sting, Grandpa said. We need eyes on Memorial Park, 10 p.m. Alex arrived an hour early. His cruiser stayed out of sight, while 2 plainclothes officers took up legal surveillance positions, under city ordinance. Body cams activated, radio silence engaged. And me? I stayed home. Grandpa went in my place. He didn't sit on the bench. He didn't play by their script. He placed the envelope gently beneath the slats, then walked to a nearby playground and pretended to check the bolts on a swing set. 30 minutes passed, then Marcus arrived, plainclothes camera bag, Bluetooth earpiece blinking faintly. He didn't speak. He sat on the bench, retrieved the envelope, scanned the area, then muttered, "Package received." That's when everything changed. Because what he didn't know was that his mic was still hot, and the line between him and Vivian was being monitored through a back-channel law enforcement tap approved by the judge 3 days earlier. Her voice came through crystal clear. Perfect, she said. Tell the Councilman the bribe's been delivered. Edit the footage to show aggression. Keep the kid in frame. We need tears this time. That sentence alone sealed her fate. It was conspiracy, fraud, extortion, child endangerment, and wire fraud, because she transmitted it across a state-monitored line. But then Marcus spoke again, his voice calm, calculating. Boss lady, we've got enough to bury this family permanently. He laughed. Vivian laughed too, and in that moment, the trap slammed shut. Plainclothes officers moved in. Marcus was apprehended. His camera seized, his phone unlocked. Inside were chat logs spanning 3 years, photos, plans, recordings, dozens of families documented. files sorted by compliance level, children's names, school zones, dates of mental breakdowns and divorces logged as pressure points. It wasn't harassment anymore. It was organized psychological warfare. Back at home, Grandpa watched. The live feed from his old military laptop, arms folded, face unreadable. When Vivian's voice cut out, he closed the laptop and whispered, "That's one." I turned to him. "What now?" He pointed to the drawer. "Now we finish it." The drawer held the key to a safety deposit box Tommy Sterling had rented just before his final deployment. Inside, Detective Alex found files, hundreds of pages, signed. Affidavits, photos, bank ledgers showing Vivian had been forging documents and planning insurance fraud months before Tommy's death. She had visited 3 different doctors in 3 states, each with new identities, claiming new injuries. She'd bought a second phone under a false name and used it to file advance paperwork for spousal benefits before Tommy had even deployed. She'd already priced his death. And now? She was using his name, his memory, to steal from other families. But she didn't know what Tommy had left behind, and she didn't know it was about to surface in front of the entire city council and every camera in the room. Vivian's network was big, but she forgot one thing. You don't pick a fight with a retired general, and you definitely don't pick a fight with one whose fallen soldier left behind a weapon stronger than rage truth. Some truths don't whisper, they explode. And when they do, the whole world stops to listen. The day of the city council meeting, the chamber was already packed before sunrise. Over 200 people filled every seat, local reporters, veteran families, teachers, parents, HOA supporters, HOA skeptics, and somewhere in the crowd, silent victims who had once feared speaking out. But not today. Today was different. Because today, General Samuel Hawk Donovan walked into that chamber wearing full dress uniform, buttons polished, ribbons in place, posture sharp as steel. In his hands, he carried a folded American flag and a sealed manila envelope. Not just any envelope, Tommy Sterling's final testimony. The only voice that could speak from beyond the grave with more force than Vivian ever could from the front row. She was already there, flanked by 2 attorneys, arms crossed tightly across her blazer, surrounded by expensive-looking binders. The smile on her face was mechanical. Her confidence came not from innocence, but from the assumption that no one would dare challenge her in public. But then she saw the envelope, and the color drained from her face. The mayor tried to call the chamber to order. He couldn't, because General Donovan stepped forward first, and silence followed him like a tide. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask for permission. He simply stood before the podium, placed the envelope gently on the wood, and said, "I speak today not for myself, but for a soldier who never came home." He opened the envelope and read, "If you're reading this, something's happened to me, and you need to investigate my wife immediately." Gasps swept the chamber. Vivian flinched, her lawyers whispering frantically. But Grandpa didn't stop. He wrote this before deploying to Afghanistan. 2 weeks before he died, he said, voice calm, steady, unbreakable. Staff Sergeant David Sterling, Bronze Star, husband, protector, victim. The crowd sat frozen. Tommy documented unauthorized. Credit accounts, forged medical records, fake insurance claims filed in his name while he was serving overseas. He held up photocopies. These were filed before he was deployed, which means she planned to profit from his death before the first bullet was ever fired. Vivian finally snapped. "This is character assassination," she shouted, rising from her seat. "He's lying. That letter is fabricated." But no one moved, no one spoke, because Grandpa was still reading. Tommy wrote, "Don't let her use my death to hurt other military families. I've left proof in deposit box 847. Everything. Is there? Accounts, recordings, photographs?" She's not grieving. She's hunting. Vivian's lawyers rose too. "Madam Chair, we move to suppress this reading." But then Detective Alex Rodriguez stood up from the back row. He wasn't in uniform. He didn't need to be. He raised a folder at the FBI's official findings and said 2 words that changed the tone of the entire room. "It's real." He stepped forward. Tommy's deposit box matched current forensic evidence from at least 8 families harassed by Ms. Sterling, Alex said. His handwriting, his voice recordings, his financial logs, all match. This isn't an accusation. This is confirmation. And then he added, we also have phone recordings from Ms. Sterling coordinating bribes, forged citations, and social media campaigns meant to destroy families, including one against a decorated general and his 8-year-old granddaughter. Vivian tried to leave, but 2 federal officers were already waiting near the exit. She sat down slowly, her body trembling. She knew. It was over. The mayor looked around helplessly. I think we need to recess. No. A woman in the crowd stood. It was Mrs. Hartley, widow of a Navy veteran. She held a folder of her own, letters, citations, and forged threats she'd once received from Vivian. Then another man stood, then another. One by one, residents who had been silent stepped forward and said the words that finally shattered the illusion Vivian had built for years. She said I'd lose custody of my son. She made me sign my house over under threat of legal action. She told me I'd be reported for elder neglect if I didn't comply. They spoke without fear now, because the lies had been exposed, because Tommy had spoken, because Grandpa had carried that truth into the heart of the storm and laid it bare for all to see. Vivian sat motionless, pale, shaking, muttering something to herself that no one could hear. And when she finally looked up, she was staring straight into the eyes of a mother who had nearly signed her life away for peace. And a child who had asked if the clipboard lady would take her away, me and Luna, and we didn't look away. When it was over, the mayor cleared his throat. Effective immediately, he said. The emergency ordinance to enforce mandatory HOA membership is hereby suspended pending criminal investigation into Ms. Sterling and any associated parties. Vivian's legal team didn't argue. They couldn't. The entire room watched federal agents step forward with arrest warrants. Mail fraud, wire fraud, forgery, child endangerment, conspiracy, federal charges. And still. Vivian tried one last time. They handcuffed her. She screamed, I did it to survive. He left me with nothing. The military threw him away and I deserved something. That's when Grandpa stepped forward one last time. He placed Tommy's bronze star on the podium. And, he said, you don't survive by destroying the people your husband died to protect. You don't get justice by terrorizing children. And you don't call yourself a widow when you started planning his death before he ever left. The room went quiet again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was closure. And just like that, the monster lost her mask. Some villains don't die with the spotlight. They try to survive in the shadows. And Vivian, she had shadows everywhere. The night after the city council meeting, our home felt different. Not lighter, not safer. Just quieter. Like the moment after. A thunderclap, when the sky holds its breath and waits to see what's left standing. Luna slept through the night for the first time in weeks. My wife sat beside her bed, tears silently streaking down her face, whispering over and over, we're safe now, baby. We're safe now. But Grandpa didn't rest. He stayed in the dining room, papers spread across the table, screens open. Phone calls whispered he wasn't celebrating, he was studying, because he knew Vivian was never acting alone. She's not smart enough to build a forgery operation that lasted 20 years, he said quietly. She had help, financial help, political help, legal help. He paused, eyes narrowing at a campaign donation ledger, and the ones who helped her still think they're invisible. He was right, because within 24 hours of her arrest, the fallout began. News broke that Councilman Trevor Ashford, the same man who'd pushed the emergency ordinance requiring mandatory HOA compliance, had quietly disappeared from public appearances. Emails leaked, bank transfers surfaced, and the number $75,000 started showing up everywhere. Detective Alex called us the next morning with one word: confirmed. Trevor's campaign. Funds had received over $75,000 in consulting fees from Sterling Properties LLC, Vivian's shell company. And that emergency ordinance? It had been written by her, delivered to Trevor's assistant days before the vote, disguised as a constituent concern. He hadn't even written it. He just signed it. And in exchange, Vivian funded his re-election. But the money trail didn't stop there. Vivian had wired funds to 2 more city officials, one in code enforcement, another in zoning, both of whom had approved fake violations against targeted families. The web was vast, but now it was unraveling. Alex worked quickly, backed by a federal task force. Property seizure orders were filed. 8 homes, all acquired through intimidation, were frozen. Marcus Webb, caught red-handed during the fake bribery sting, had already turned informant. Facing prison time, he revealed everything: the templates, the forged seals, the harassment playbook Vivian had created, a 32-page document titled Compliance Strategy: How to Control Resistant Households. Inside were details no one should have had: how to exploit family dynamics, how to fabricate fines using legal-sounding language, how to target veterans by manipulating VA fears, PTSD claims, custody rumors, threats of reporting to command officers. She hadn't just attacked us. She'd studied us. For years. It was systematic, cruel, cold, and profitable. Over $400,000 in home equity stolen. And yet, she was never supposed to get caught. Because Vivian had one last insurance policy. She had buried her paper trail under forged identities and offshore accounts. But the biggest secret? She had prearranged her defense. Her lawyers moved fast. They filed an emergency appeal to have Tommy Sterling's letter declared inadmissible, citing military confidentiality laws. They claimed Grandpa had violated federal protocol by revealing classified military documents without authorization. But that was her final miscalculation, because she forgot who Grandpa was and what he had kept. He didn't just have a letter. He had the original declassification record from 2019, signed by the Department of Military Archives. Stamped approved. Tommy had anticipated her. In his original instructions, he had submitted his documents through a secure military protocol known as postmortem whistleblower protection, a rarely used process that allowed soldiers to file sealed testimony that could be released only if their death was followed by suspicious circumstances. He'd written every line with legal foresight. I request my testimony be made public if my wife is ever implicated in fraud against military families, Tommy had written. This is not revenge. This is duty. Even in death, he'd protected the next generation. Vivian's lawyers didn't stand a chance. They withdrew the motion within 48 hours. Her entire legal team collapsed under the weight of authenticated documents, forensic confirmation, and, most damning of all, the voices of the families she had hurt. 27 families across 4 states, and that number was still climbing. But while justice moved forward, healing wasn't instant. The damage she'd caused was deep, emotional, scars etched into children's memories, marriages strained by fear, veterans doubting their own instincts. And Luna? She still checked the window every morning. She still asked if the lady with the clipboard was coming back. One afternoon, I found her coloring a picture of our house. She drew Grandpa standing outside in full uniform, holding a shield. Behind him, she drew her swing set. I made Grandpa a protector, she said. I smiled through the ache in my chest. He already is, I whispered. But Grandpa wasn't done. He'd already started contacting the victims Vivian had left behind, building a network of military families, teachers, nurses, and elderly couples who had all suffered in silence. And together, they created something no HOA fraudster could ever destroy. A movement. The Tommy Sterling Foundation was launched within weeks of Vivian's arrest, dedicated to protecting military families from housing discrimination, fraud, and psychological warfare disguised as neighborhood policy. The mission was simple: defend those who defended us. Federal prosecutors announced that Vivian Sterling would face 7 years in federal prison, with $347,000 in court-ordered restitution and a lifetime ban from involvement in any property transactions. Marcus Webb received 3 years for document forgery and identity manipulation. And Councilman Trevor Ashford? He was charged with campaign finance violations, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud. His career was over. The city council that once allowed intimidation to masquerade as community enforcement was now rewriting its entire policy manual, and I was elected as president of the newly reformed Neighborhood Alliance. Not an HOA, not an enforcement board, a real alliance. Built on transparency, led by the people, and dedicated to the idea that no family should ever face what we faced, alone. The community transformed. People came forward. Apologies were made, and slowly, painfully, trust began to regrow. But Grandpa? He never let down his guard. He still walked the perimeter every morning, still checked the cameras, still kept his maps and files. Because he knew one truth better than anyone: evil doesn't always vanish when the courtroom doors close. Sometimes, it just waits for another opening, and that's why he stayed ready. Not out of fear, but out of honor, out of promise, out of love for a soldier he once commanded and failed to protect. But not anymore. Because now, Tommy Sterling's voice had changed everything. He didn't die in silence. He died leaving behind a weapon, a letter, and that letter, filled with the quiet bravery of a soldier betrayed, had broken the cycle. Forever. You don't come back from something like this unchanged. Not as a family, not as a neighborhood, and definitely not as a man who once believed the battlefield ended at the edge of war. But for General Samuel Hawk Donovan, the war just changed. Its shape. It wore clipboards instead of uniforms, suits instead of body armor, whispers instead of bullets, and yet the damage it caused, just as real. It took time, weeks of silence, of unpacking wounds we never saw coming, of learning how to live again without looking over our shoulders every time a car slowed near the driveway. Luna still had nightmares, but now she knew that name Tommy. Not as a soldier, but as a guardian. She called him the soldier who saved us from the bad clipboard lady. She drew his picture in her notebook, a stick figure in a uniform, holding hands with Grandpa, and under it, she wrote, "My protectors." Grandpa never said much about it. But every time she left those drawings on his workbench, I noticed he kept them neatly stacked beneath his tactical notes. The house became quieter. But the mission didn't stop. Vivian's arrest didn't just trigger justice, it ignited something bigger. Veteran families across the country started contacting us. Emails, letters, stories that all sounded the same. Fake HOA threats, sudden safety inspections, harassment campaigns disguised as policy. Some didn't even realize they'd been targeted until they saw the news about Sterling properties on TV. And suddenly, they understood. It hadn't been paranoia, it had been a system, one built to exploit pride, fear, silence. That's when Grandpa took action again, not with surveillance, not with tactics, but with purpose. He accepted the city's offer to serve as the first community veteran liaison, a new role designed to protect veteran families from real estate fraud, HOA abuse, and legal intimidation. His first act? To write new legislation, the Tommy Sterling Act, calling for federal criminal penalties for anyone who used a soldier's service against their family in civil disputes. The bill was drafted within a month, signed by bipartisan sponsors, backed by dozens of veteran advocacy groups, and it was heading to Congress. Meanwhile, the Tommy Sterling Memorial Fund launched locally, offering free legal support to military families facing HOA retaliation or false violations. Every dollar recovered from Vivian's seized assets went into that fund. Her houses? Auctioned publicly. The proceeds, $347,000, were returned to victims she had once forced into silence. It was the loudest kind of justice, and the quietest kind of healing. Was appointed to city council, not because I wanted power, but because the neighborhood insisted I protect what we'd all just rebuilt. My platform was simple: transparency, protection, accountability. No more secret citations, no more clipboard, tyrants, no more predators hiding behind bylaws. We created a new digital archive. Every HOA action now logged, time-stamped, and made available to homeowners at any time. No more mystery, just truth. And Luna? She started playing outside again. Her hopscotch squares returned to the sidewalk, brighter, longer, more colorful. The swing set Grandpa had once marked as a vulnerability was now her sanctuary. She wore a plastic badge she made in art, class, neighborhood safety officer, and spent afternoons checking in on elderly neighbors with a little clipboard of her own. Only this time, her clipboard came with flowers and thank you notes. The entire neighborhood felt different, cleaner, calmer, braver. At the next community town hall, we held a dedication ceremony. We unveiled a bronze plaque outside the newly named Sterling Memorial Community Center. It read, "In memory of Staff Sergeant David Tommy Sterling, who gave his life protecting civilians, and whose voice continues to protect us still." Veterans in the audience removed their hats. Grandpa stood in uniform, eyes glassy but jaw firm. He saluted the plaque, then turned to us and said something I'll never forget. Some soldiers carry their weapon into the afterlife. Tommy's weapon was truth, and truth never runs out of ammunition. But just when we thought it was over, one final twist revealed itself. It came as a letter, postmarked from out of state. No return address. Inside was a short note, typed in courier font. Sterling wasn't working alone. She was a franchise, a template. What she did in your neighborhood was done in 5 others. Same seals, same tactics, same shell companies. You exposed one head of the snake, but the body's still slithering. A friend tucked inside the envelope was a USB drive, encrypted, but Grandpa cracked it in an hour. Inside, a spreadsheet, 5 cities, 6 HOA groups, dozens of families, a silent pattern of financial acquisition through harassment, nearly identical to what we had just survived. Each one listed under the name of a different property company, all variations of Sterling, all funded through a web of fake LLCs. It was bigger than any of us imagined. What Vivian did? It wasn't personal revenge, it was tested warfare. She'd taken her pain, her hate, and turned it into a model, a template, and others had copied. And because it worked, until Tommy, until Luna cried at the window, and a general remembered what it felt like to lose one of his men to silence. That night, Grandpa gathered us in the living room. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked at us with that old commander's steadiness. "We were the opening act," he said. "The main event starts now." Some stories don't end with victory. They end with purpose. Because victory fades, but purpose echoes. The letter we received, the anonymous warning about 5 more neighborhoods using Vivian's harassment playbook, didn't scare us. It activated us, and this time, we weren't alone. Within days, Grandpa had coordinated with the federal task force handling Vivian's prosecution. They confirmed it. The LLCs she used were part of a replicated real estate scheme, taught and sold quietly through gray market seminars. Her criminal enterprise? It wasn't original. It was licensed. A twisted system of intimidation disguised as community regulation, sold under titles like accelerated compliance acquisition and neighborhood efficiency modeling. And Vivian? She'd simply taken the model, added her own personal vengeance, and deployed it with surgical cruelty. But she wasn't the only one. Across the country, other HOAs, small, unregulated, weaponized by greed, were using the same blueprint. We knew then that this story wasn't just about our street. It was about every street, and that's when the movement took off. The Tommy Sterling Act hit the House floor in Washington. A bipartisan panel reviewed the case study, our footage, the forged notices, the encrypted recordings, and most of all, Tommy's final letter. A voice from the grave that laid out a 20-year fraud pattern more clearly than any courtroom brief. The bill passed the House, then the Senate. It was signed into law with a new clause. Federal felony charges for anyone who weaponizes HOA power, real estate fraud, or community bylaws against active duty or veteran families. The law was named, not just after Tommy, it was titled in full, the Staff Sergeant David Tommy Sterling Family Protection Act, a name that would live in the congressional record forever. The moment it passed, Grandpa stood before our small local veteran hall and said something none of us had ever heard before. He told a story. Not about war, not about combat, but about regret. I commanded soldiers who ran toward danger, he said. Tommy was one of them. Loyal, brave, smart. He saved lives in a country that barely knew his name, but he came home to danger he didn't see coming, and I failed him. He looked at the bronze star displayed behind the podium, and now, 20 years later, he's the one protecting me. That night, veterans from across the state arrived, many who had once been targeted by similar tactics. They brought documents, photos, stories, and one by one they handed them to Grandpa, not to the authorities, not to lawyers, but to him, because he'd earned their trust, because he wasn't just a general anymore. He was a guardian. The movement expanded. The Tommy Sterling Memorial Network launched in 12 states, each hub offering free legal assistance to HOA targeted veterans, rapid response surveillance for suspected harassment, access to media partners ready to spotlight corruption, and most importantly, community. Real, unwavering community. Because the greatest threat to tyrants isn't exposure, it's unity. Vivian Sterling's prison interview aired 6 months later. A local affiliate interviewed her from the federal detention facility where she was serving her sentence. She still wore the same blazer, still spoke in that same smooth voice. But this time she wasn't in control. I lost everything, she said, because I tried to survive the only way I knew how. And no one cared about me. No one protected me. When asked if she regretted anything, she replied, I regret leaving a paper trail. No apology, no remorse, just confirmation of what we always knew. Some people don't want peace. They want control, and they'll wear any mask to get it. But even that mask can't survive a soldier's voice, because Tommy's story didn't die with her arrest or with the bill. It lived on. In every city council where a citizen now stood up and asked, Is this fine even legal? In every neighborhood where a veteran posted a sign, Know your rights, we did. In every courthouse where a lawyer now used the Sterling case as precedent to shut down fake citations, forced sales, and weaponized neighborhood codes, the final tribute came 1 year after Vivian's arrest, Memorial Day. Our entire community gathered at the local cemetery. Veterans in full dress uniforms stood in perfect formation. Luna, now 9, held a folded flag beside Grandpa, and a new granite headstone had been unveiled. Staff Sergeant David Tommy Sterling, 1980, 2003, he protected the innocent, in life, in death, in legacy. A military chaplain spoke. But the real eulogy came from Grandpa. He stepped forward in full uniform, every step slow, intentional, carried by purpose. And he placed Tommy's final letter, laminated, framed, into a glass case beside the headstone. Then he saluted. Tears rolled down his cheeks. And, he said, voice cracking but steady, mission accomplished, brother. The people are safe. Your warning was heard. Your fight finished what mine couldn't. The entire crowd stood, in silence, not in mourning, but in awe, because this wasn't just a grave, it was a foundation, a message in stone, a reminder that truth does not die with the fallen. It waits, it watches, and when the moment is right, it speaks. Now, 5 years later, our community stands stronger than ever. No HOA corruption, no secret fines, no fear. Our children know their rights. Our veterans know their worth. And our enemies? They know we are watching. I still serve on the council, making sure what happened to us never happens again. Luna now volunteers with the Memorial Fund, helping other kids learn how to speak up when something feels wrong. And Grandpa? He still walks the perimeter every morning, still wears that quiet look of readiness. But now, there's peace in his eyes, because he kept a promise. To a soldier, to a family, to the truth. And Echo Stories family, if there's one thing you take away from this journey, let it be this: truth doesn't whisper forever. It waits. And when the right voice speaks, even from the grave, it becomes a storm that no lie can survive. So if you're facing an injustice, don't run. Stand. Fight, remember. Tommy, and never forget. Sometimes the strongest defense is a name on a mailbox.